Okay, so we have Marmakom. We didn't meet last week because I was in Israel, but we have new Marmakom son called the Alim Gavar. I want to speak about that for a few minutes. So, what is called the Alim Gavar? So, let's remind everybody. So, it's the Gemara in Baba Basra. The Gemara says that there was Hahu Arva. There was a certain boat. If everybody recalls the case, if not, I'll tell it to you. There was a certain boat that it was sitting in the water, and there was a dispute between two individuals, each one claiming ownership. I'll read you the language. This is from a previous Marmakomo. It's not the latest, but we're going to be using the latest tonight. Hau arva dahava minso ala betre. There was a boat that was whose ownership was under dispute. What does that mean? Hai Omer Didihi, Hai Omer Didihi. Each one claimed that he was the exclusive owner of this boat. So Asachad Minayu Lebeidina Viamar. So one of them came to court and said, Tifsu Adamai Sina Sade Didihi. So he came to court and he said, do me a favor to the Dayanim. Oh, I see we have new I just have to interject that I have regards for you from your grandson.
Yeah, I heard, yeah.
I enjoyed meeting him in Yeshivat Shalvim. Anyway, so this boat is under dispute, and one of the claimants, one of the rivals, says to Bezin, "Listen, hold on to the boat, or at least hold this issue in abeyance. I'm going to bring witnesses." Adamaisina Sahadi Didihi. So the Gemara says, "Tafsina no lo tafsina." Will Bezin get involved, and will they, freeze the situation, or no? So the Gemara says, Rav Huna Amar Tafsina and Rav Yehuda Amar Lo Tafsina. There's a debate whether or not Bezdin is going to get involved or not going to get involved. Anyways, Azav Lo Ashka Sadi, Bezdin did get involved, and they, didn't allow this case to move forward. And then the fellow, of course, couldn't produce his witnesses, the witnesses that he claimed that he was going to bring in to resolve the case. He couldn't find them. So Omar Lahu, so then he said, listen, sorry about that, Bezdin, but Afkua v'chol da'alim gavar. Let's go back to where we were, and now we can say that whoever wins the struggle, whoever is mightier, whoever is more effective will operate. He'll be the one to keep the object. So now the question is, since they didn't do that right away and Bezdin intervened, even though they intervened, as it turns out, without justification. So the question is, mafkina or lo mafkina? Will you now drop the object, into Rosh Hashanah and say, whoever comes up with it is the real owner? Or once Bezdin gets involved, so they now have a responsibility, and that responsibility precludes them just saying, kol da'alim gav. So the Gemara says, Rav Yehuda Amar Lo Mafkinan, Rav Papa Amar Mafkinan. That too is a debate, meaning whether Bezdin would get involved to begin with is a debate. And there's a secondary debate if they do get involved, and it turns out that their involvement was unwarranted. Will we go back to where we were? Will we turn back the clock and say Kol Da'alim Gavar? Or once they did, intervene, that, the standards of Bezdin then become a factor in moving forward.
Aren't there two issues here? We normally say that Bezdin protects its reputation, that it shouldn't be trifled with. So therefore, that we pretty much hold that to Talmud, to the whole Shas. That's a given.
All right. I mean, of course, you have to know when and when not, right? They protect it. So part of their protecting of their, we'll see in a moment, is maybe not to get involved to begin with. But once they get involved, so then protecting their reputation means.
By the way, the other thing, this may be a little bit out of the circle, but part of the theory of Kol Da'alim Gavar is that the person who really has the right on his side is going to win.
That's the Russia's view, which we didn't.
This guy already showed that he's not the right guy. He had the easy job to do. He said he's going to find the Adam, and he couldn't find.
No. So, it could be that he really thought he had Adam, and Maybe they didn't want to show up. They didn't want to take a
No,
stand. They didn't want to
but according to the Russia's theory, that person is going to persevere if he has to go to the end of the world to make.
right, but it's not a guarantee. It's we'll see in a moment what the Rush says. So we're going to turn to the Rush in just a minute. There are
Where are
three
we reading?
different.
Where,
What's
where
that?
are we reading? Are we reading from the Mara Makomot now, or
Not the latest ones, a previous one.
the middle one of the three?
Well, there are more than three, I think, but maybe the middle, yeah, probably the middle one. No, I'm sorry, the early one, the one that say
One
Makoros
has 5 pages, one has 6 pages, one has 4 pages.
the ones that say on it,
order.
wrote Be'inyan Beis Ochzin on the first page.
Oh, okay.
But soon we're going to go to the latest one. I'm just going back and forth a little bit. Do you have that one?
Yes, thank you.
And it's on page 1. I'm reading Babli Bavasar Lamadalad Omid Beis.
Thank you.
Got it? Okay.
Got it.
I'm about to read, the next entry, but the Hilchos lo tafsinan vehechos tafsinan lo mafkinan. So then the Gemara says, Ze Omer shalavosai, Ze Omer shalavosai, Omer Rav Nachman kol the alim gavar, whoever is stronger wins. And then the Gemara asks the question, why do we say that in some cases and we give a different psak in other cases? So that's the principle called alim gavar. Since you brought up the Rush, so let's discuss the Rush. So now let's go to the newest Marmakomos. That was just the Gemara. Now let's go to the newest Marmakomos, which are the relevant ones for today. So the Rush, you mentioned the Rush. I think we've mentioned the Rush before. The Rush, this is one of the most famous Rushes around. I say that sometimes about different Rishon, but it's true. This is like one of the most well-known passages in the Rosh was Rabbeinu Asher. He was a German French Tosafist, and he wrote the Sefer HaRush, the Halachos of the Rush. He also wrote a version of Tosas HaRush, and he also wrote Chuvos called Shelos Chuvas HaRush. So I'm going to read 2 sections of the Rush, one in Bav Metzia and one in Bav Basra, one in Bav Metzia, and then I'm going to read a 3rd section of the Rush, and that's from the Chuvas HaRush. And the common denominator of these 3 is the psychological insight that he shares that was referred to a few minutes ago about a justification of Kol Dalam Gavar. But as you'll see in each discussion, he emphasizes something a little bit different. And in the tshuva, he seems to take a bit of a different emphasis or stand than in the other 2 places. And I'll explain why in a moment. But before we get to that,
Which came last?
What?
Which came last?
Most people think that the tshuvas of the Rush were written at the later part of his life. Remember that the Rush was an Ashkenaz authority, but at the end of his life, he went to Spain, and he set up shop, halachic shop in Castile. So that's a very interesting. In his chuvas, he writes a lot about the changes that he encountered, when he moved to Spain.
He wasn't very happy about it.
Yeah, exactly. Very nostalgic for the old country, people get that way. But it's an interesting phenomenon, of course, because, he was part of both cultures. And his son, just to make it also clear, which will be relevant in a moment, his son was Rabbi Yaakov. He had a number of sons. Rabbi Yehuda, he had a son. He had at least 3 sons I'm aware of. But the most famous was Rabbi Yaakov, who's known as Rabbi Yaakov Ben Arash, or Rabbi Yaakov Bal HaTurim. He's the one who authored the tour on Or Chaim and Eben Oezer and Rodea. The Arba Turim was authored by the son of the Rush, Rabbeinu Yaakov Bal HaTurim, and commentaries on the tour included the Beis Yosef and the Bach. Beis Yosef is the author of the Shulchan Aruch, and the Bach is the father-in-law of the Taz. So like this became like a very the Rush's impact is really enormous. Okay. Okay. So this is what the Rush says. But before we get to what the Rush says, let me just present the problem. The problem, of course, is, as we've said many times, is that Kol Alam Gavar doesn't seem to fit our instinctive and our experiential perspective on law, right? Typically, Jewish law does not reward, might, and it's on the merit of the case. It's definitely a cerebral, oriented. Don't promote any kind of violence. So the idea of kol da'alim gavar, which according to most Rishonim means either evidence, but also can mean, whoever comes up with the object physically in the interim in some sort of a struggle. It seems to, rub against, all of our instincts, when it comes to the halacha. Ad kedei kach, and I think I've mentioned this, that the Tur, who is the son of the Rush, in his Hakdama to Choshen Mishpat, he quotes from Rabbeinu Yonah's Perush on Avos about the importance of law. And he explains that without law, chaos would prevail. Chaos is not a good thing. So when he wants to say chaos would prevail and that's not a good thing, he uses a couple of different expressions, rabbinic expressions. One of them is, without law, isha skavero chayim bla'o, which means every man would swallow up his neighbor. In other words, if it was the law of the jungle, so then people would be fighting all the time.
That's from Pirkei Avos.
Yeah, exactly. It's from Pirkei Avos. That's the phrase comes from. Ishas kavero chayim bla'o. So another phrase that he uses to characterize chaos, he says, without law, you'd say that kol da'alim gavar. Where did that come from? From our Gemara in Bava Basra. Except there's only one problem, and that is when the Gemara says there are two problems. When the Gemara says kol da'alim gavar, that is actually the psak in that case. It's a chaotic resolution, but it's a valid chaotic resolution. So the Tur knew that, of course, and in Siman Kuf Lamed Tes in Choshen Mishpat, he discusses the laws of Kol Da'alim Gavar, but still, when he was fishing around for a melitza, for an expression to show something that we want to avoid, he said Kol Da'alim Gavar. And this, despite the fact that is the psak in certain case. Not only that, but point number two is that, as I said before, the Tur is the son of the Rush. So of all the Rishonim, the one who provided the most compelling justification for Kol Da'alim Gavar was the Rush, his father. And it's not as if he didn't know it. He quotes it in the Tur. So
on the other hand, if one takes the position that society would collapse if the reputation of the Bezdin would be undermined, then maybe Kol Da'alim Gavar is a better situation than the Bezdin making a mistake.
No, 100%. That's certainly the case. And that is part of the justification. I'm just saying it's ironic, not contradictory, but ironic that this phrase, can be used, and in a way to show unlawfulness when that is the law in this case, although it's an unlawful law in order to protect the reputation of the Bezdin. But it's what I'm saying is it's a little complicated, but in a very interesting way. So having said that, let's take a step back. But what we're trying to figure out is why would anybody say Kol Da'alim Gavar? Why would that ever be the psak? It seems to glorify, power and might. So the answer is, there are two answers basically, or maybe they overlap. One is what you just said, right? Which is sometimes it's better to have a chaotic solution than it is to have a civilized solution if the civilized solution doesn't have a basis for it, and if its association with the court, undermines confidence or the standards of the court, because the bigger, that's what you were just saying, right? The bigger principle of protecting the the standard, the gold standards of the Beis Din for the larger goal of providing order and justice in society, overrides the resolution of one particular circumstance.
This also a version of Sheval Tasa versus doing something, do no harm, in other words?
No, because there can be harm, So I don't think it's Sheval Tasa. But what I do think is it's a kind of, that's the perspective which most of the Rishonim take here, which is that this isn't a psak or a din, it's a siluk. Siluk means a disengagement. In other words, Beis Din isn't saying that this is the proper solution. Beis Din is saying we don't have, because we have high standards, and when we render a psak, we want people to, be loyal to and respect, revere that psak. So, we are disengaging from this particular quarrel because we don't have the objective means to render an appropriate objective psak. So better there be chaos or a resolution based in chaos in very few cases, but but the reputation of the court in terms of its involvement continue to uphold high standards, than the alternative. So that's one possibility. There's a second possibility, and that is the Rush. And the Rush, as you correctly noted before, but we're going to read it inside now, has a psychological suggestion. Now, the question is, when the Rush provided this psychological suggestion, which we're going to discuss in a moment, like how far did he mean to apply it? Was he saying this explains and this fully justifies or validates Kol Alam Gavar, or was he saying it remains, something which is, preferably avoided? But if you have to do it, there's a saving grace, meaning there's an element of perhaps justice, that also, justifies it. But not that it's birur. Does he mean this is a birur? This really clarifies and it's a psak and a din? Or maybe those are three different points. Or maybe he continues to think like the others that it's a siluk, it's a disengagement. He just thinks that we wouldn't have even disengaged if we didn't have some confidence that there's a good reason to think that it all might come out well. And the psychological insight is what we rely on, that it'll all come out justly. Okay, what is that psychological insight? So now let's look at the Rush in Bava Basra. But we're going to see, in addition to his big chiddush, which he repeats in three places, the psychology of Kol Alam Gavar, there's also added details that in each case he provides, which were controversial, but which we need to discuss. So let's talk about number one. So everybody have this? This is the Markomos, the newest ones, that say my name, and then they say Mikorot be'inyan yakloko v'Kol Alam Gavar. Everybody have that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So now skip the first one, the Trumas Hadeshen. We've discussed that actually already. Go to the second entry. It's Rosh Masechet Bava Basra, Perek Gimel Siman Chaf Beis. Okay? So listen to this. Zeomer Shalavosai, Zeomer Shalavosai, Omar Nachman Kol Alam Gavar. That's the title of the essay. The principle that if each one makes a claim and we can't decide, we don't have any evidence, it's just his word against his word. So the rule is, Kol Da'alim, whoever is stronger, the mighty win. The might makes right. Okay. So then the Rush says the following. Number one, Hi Kol Da'alim Gavar Dinahu. Now we have to figure out what he means by some of these words. But here he calls Kol Da'alim Gavar a din. The Kol Misha Gavar Yodo. Now listen to this words. Bipam Rishona. Whoever wins in the first struggle between these round one, okay, we've made allusion to this. Ushalo ad shiyavi chavero raya. He is the winner Kol Dalam Gavar is a 1-round struggle. Whoever wins that first round, unless the other party brings actual witnesses which can overturn this temporary or interim psak, but the interim psak is over after a winner emerges after one round.
But it's never final, right?
Well, it's never final if the other person brings real evidence.
It's an open-ended thing. It's in
It's
law.
open-ended.
Question whether something is dismissed with prejudice or without prejudice, so to speak. So
I mean, it's open-ended if there is going to be real evidence. But
no,
what
for the rest of his life, this guy has to worry that the other guy might come with some witnesses to upend what he did.
Yeah, witnesses fine, but I'm saying it. But what the Rush is being mechadesh here is that it's not open-ended vis-a-vis phase one, which is called Alam Gavar. The called Alam Gavar is there's only one round, is what I'm trying to say. If it's a match of some sort, it's not 15 rounds, and it's not 12 rounds, and it's not 10 rounds. It's not endless rounds. We'll see others disagree, by the way, because if it's called Alam Gavar, it's whoever, if you're basically disengaging, you might have argued that disengagement means disengagement. So let whatever happens happen, right? But the Rush is saying we say whatever let whatever happens, but only after the first round, only till after the first round. Whoever emerges as the victor in the first round, it's his. The only thing that can overturn it from there is real evidence.
And is the surprise that this happened after they went to Bezdin? Because if it happened before they went to Bezdin, it would be a simple case of Moti Mechaber Olavaraya. Whoever grabs
well, it would be Moti Mechaber Olavaraya if we knew that the struggle took place after the suffix. In other words, that's called
coming to Bezdin or the suffix.
Even after coming, because that's called tfisa la'achar leidas hasafek. Certainly after Bezdin, but even if it's after, for some reason, we knew that they were each making a claim, and then one fellow knocked the other one over the head, and he took the object. That's still called tfisa la'achar leidas hasafek, and understandably,
and Moti Mechaber would not apply in that case.
Correct. I mean, that's a little bit what the Gemara was asking, which we read a couple of weeks ago. The Gemara in Vav Amud Aleph. Right, the Gemara on Vav Amud Aleph says in the case of Shnai Moksem Betalis, right, each one claiming Kula Shali, and you'll say Achloku. So the Gemara says, Tokfa Echad Bifanenu Mahu. Let's say one guy overpowers the other guy. After we said Yachloku, he just he takes the object away from him. So the Gemara says, what do you mean? If he screams right away and his outcry is clear, then we're not going to let the guy who overpowers him keep it, because that is, everybody saw what happened. That's, I'm translating legally, that's called tfisa la'achar leidas hasafek. So similarly here as well. Okay. Anyway, so the Rush says the first chiddush of the Rush is that there's only one round, not more. Why? So he explains, B'chozman shelo yavi raya, if the other fellow cannot bring legal evidence, afim tigbar yado, even if he, musters, let's say went home, he did exercise, he became stronger, or, whatever it was, lo shavkina le'lafuke mine. We don't let him, meaning this struggle part, after the first round, is ended. There's no continuation of the struggle. But the Rush gives a reason. Listen to the reason. The lo mistaber sheyitaknu chachamim sheyukol yameim b'meriva machlokas. It doesn't make sense that the chachamim are going to allow this to continue, because really, when you think about it, why are we allowing kol dalam gavar in a way? So we'll see about the psychological bureau part in a minute. But another part is we one way or another, we want to get this behind us. We want tranquility and harmony to return, to the community. If you're going to say kol dalam gavar and there's infinite rounds, right, you are not encouraging tranquility. You're encouraging continuous strife. So the Rush says,
but the first round is a physical fight.
What's that?
The first round is a physical fight?
It can be a physical fight, yeah. So because if you don't say that, kol yimeim will be b'meriba machlok. Very interesting, beautiful language, by the way. Hayom yigbar zeh umachar chavero. You know, one day this guy's stronger, the next guy is the other fellow goes home, he takes a little karate, you know, and he comes back, and it goes on and on. Ela chachamim hosku, but listen to the language of the Rush. Dinahu, hosku. It sounds like, even though it's not their psa, they're overseeing this in a way. Kol de alim gavar, bipam hazos, kol de alim bipam hazos gavar. He added in a few words. Whoever outstruggles the other party this first time, in this first round, in other words, in this only round, gavar. He is the one who emerges with the object until or unless you can bring legal evidence to the contrary. So listen to the psychology now. But it's also just the language is perfect. The samchu al zeh. What does samchu mean?
Rely on.
Rely. Now, rely can mean like we're convinced that this is the case, or it can be there's a smach, meaning we don't know if this is exactly true, but it's something to to hang your hat on. It's probably more the second than the first.
It's like an umdana?
It's an umdana, but it's not foolproof. But meaning what bothers the Rush? What bothers the Rush is, even if you're mistalik, and you want this to end, but it seems like blatantly unjust. So if we can find some silver psychological lining, that will establish, that maybe some good comes from this or some justice may come from this, but it's 50-50, right? So the answer is no, it's not 50-50. There's something to rely on here as well. What is that? What is there to rely on? So listen to the Rush. This is his famous comment. The komi shadinimo karov lahavi rayos. The person who is in the right, the real owner, has a better chance of bringing evidence that will, prove his case, because he's the one, who's telling the truth. Person in the position of the truth has a better chance to prove it.
That sounds like a position of a bridge too far.
Okay, well, let's continue for a moment. We'll see. Ba'od misha din imo yimsar nafsho lahamid shalo biado mimashi yimsar ha'acher ligzol. Who's going to exert more effort? The person who knows that he is right and is driven by a sense of, justice, or the person who, is he knows that he's stealing, right? There's no real investment for him. He's trying to do something improper. So how much is he going to invest, in attaining his goal?
Problem is that so far the Rush is only using the intellectual high road to the Kol Dalam Gava. The guy doesn't have to invest any money if he has a bunch of thugs that's gonna grab the, and not let the other guy, the other guy is 5'2" and he's got 6.
But we're just saying his heart, he's not, how dedicated. The person who's fighting for truth and justice, he's dedicated. The person, it's a lark for the Goslin, it's, it's a way for him, to steal somebody else's money, but he has no investment in this particular. He knows it isn't his. Moreover, the final point, the Od Yomer Ma Betza, She'emsar Nafshi Vayomer Lamachar Yavi Raya V'Yotzenamiyadis. The Gazan is thinking, listen, if I can get away with it, with a quick, easy mark, is that what they say? Or steal, whatever it is, great. But for me to invest so much in this thing doesn't make sense, because he could find evidence tomorrow that it's his. So why should I? Since I know that I'm lying,
greater justice to give this to tzedakah and that neither should have it than to create a fight?
Well, in the end of the day, you don't want
to give this to a charitable organization to.
If they, if they agree, that's a great idea. But let's say it's, let's say he needs it. It's his object. He should be able to give charity when he wants to give charity, and he has the rights to try to win back his object. It's his object, right? So it's hard. It's easy to say from a societal point of view. But everybody has rights to retain their own object. That's bailos. That's ownership.
In the case
Ownership rights are very serious in the halacha.
In the case of Kol Dom Gova,
Yeah.
if the guy comes with a raya, but in between the guy who grabbed it first sold it, what happens?
Say that one more time. What happened?
In other words, Ruvain was more powerful. He grabbed it. A year later, Shimon comes with a raya that it's his. In between, Ruvain sold it to Levi.
Right. Well, so then he had no right to do that, and you would again, it might be difficult, but you would try to.
So it's not an issue of the object itself; it's a financial liability.
Well, I mean, if the point is if he couldn't retrieve the object, then there would be a financial obligation for sure. But he would even try to retrieve the object because it turns out that it wasn't his to sell, right? We'll see a different kind of an issue. Let's say what happens, before you bring evidence. Is there any reason to think? Let's assume you don't hold like the rush. I'll give you this example. We have this. If we don't get to it today, we'll finish with it next week. But the Rajba accuses the Ravid of saying the following: that number one, against the rush, there's more than one round. You could keep the struggle going. So he says, okay, if you can keep the struggle going, can the person who wins, at the point that somebody has won the struggle, but you can never tell if there's not going to be another round, can he use this object to buy things with? So the Rajba thought that the Ravid said that the answer is no. But we'll get to that.
What value is the object to him if he can't do anything with it?
Well, I guess maybe he can still use it. He just may not be able to transfer it to someone else. But we'll get to it. Okay, so that's the rush in Bava Basra. Before we even move further, just to show you, so there were other Rishonim disagree. Tosas on Vav Amud Aleph says no. There's not only one round. This is a siluk bezdin. Bezdin disengages. Part of what disengage means is that there are no rules, right? And this is also the view of the rush. And this is also the view of the Shittel and Nodil meet. So look on page 2 for a moment.
The guy brings Adam in the end to counteract the guy took. He's going to go back to Bezdin with it, isn't he not?
Sorry?
When Reuven grabs it, a year later, Shimon comes with the witnesses that they're going to go before Bezdin, are they not? So Bezdin is not total siluk here.
At that point, there's evidence. So then Bezdin at that point has the obligation, but they also have the foundation to get involved.
So we're talking about if witnesses come.
We're talking about without evidence. That's where Bezdin feels like they don't really have much to contribute. So then the question is, are they overseeing the Kol Alam Govar, or are they disengaging from it? That's really the question. So look at the Shita Mikubetzes on page 2. Everybody have that?
Yes.
Okay, it's in the middle of the page.
Middle, not Sima.
Omar Rav Nachman?
Yes, Omar Rav Nachman, Kol Alam Govar.
Okay.
So listen to this. Is very interesting. Al Mashikosav Arash. So this commentary is commenting on the Rush's idea that Kol Alam Govar has only one round. So he says, Al Mashikosav Arash bipsakov kol mi shetigaver yada b'pam rishona v'chule. That everything depends on the first round. After that, there's no more Kol Alam Govar. Kosav b'shita lo noda lemi the elo hadvarim einam brurim etzli. Says, I don't think this is not clear to me at all. Why? Shatam she'omar Kol Alam Govar mibnei she'ein bezin skukim lizakek ladina. The whole idea of Kol Alam Govar, says the Shita lo noda lemi, a little different than the Rush, is that Bezdin doesn't want to get involved because there's no basis for them to get involved. Therefore, it's better that they should disengage. But if they're disengaging, right? Right? The So part of what does disengagement mean? It means that they say, listen, we can't help you here, solve it on your own. If they're saying solve it on your own, then why is there only one round? V'lo nasa onu din. Instead of getting involved and compromising the standards of judicial resolution in a situation where there's no evidence one way or another, meaning we would be associated with a mistake, we're instead saying, listen, this is a rare situation where you have to figure out your own situation. Hold alam gavar, but it has nothing to do with us. If it has nothing to do with us, then they don't declare a winner after one round. Whoever ends up with the object going forward, there can be 1,000 rounds, Hare Hebrew Shuso, Achtigaver Yad HaEchad, Obezroa, Oberaya.
What do they do about the societal constant fighting with this approach?
Right, so I'm saying it's a rare circumstance anyway. They're just saying. So, by the way, how do we paskin? So the as I mentioned, the tour is the son of the Rush. He paskin like the Rush, and the Sman, the Shulchan Aruch, and the Beis Yosef. There are a lot of they just
doesn't the tour always paskin as the majority of the Rif, the Rambam, and
I mean they say that they do, but those are what we call a rule of thumb. They're broad rules, and there are plenty of exceptions. So, what's interesting is look at the shach on page 4 for a minute. I think you have the same page I do. Shach Kol Shemishpat Siman Kuf Lamed Tes on page 4, the last page.
Kuf Lamed Tes.
Kuf Lamed Tes.
Yeah.
Kuf Lamed Tes is. Yeah. The os base. Everybody have that? Who's looking? Okay.
Page Bavli, Bebat, Betorah, Ayin Bet. No.
Page 4 of the new ones, of the ones that we're doing.
The third line from the top.
Okay.
It says Shach.
Oh, Shach, Hoshen Mishpat, Siman Kuf Lamed Tet.
Exactly. So then there's a os base or sivkatan base. So the Shulchan Aruch, following the tour, paskins like the Rush, that there's only one round. So the Shach said, Af im tegaver yad, even if the other guy, comes back, the return of Shimon, we'll call it, it doesn't make a difference. Round one it determines. So then the Shach commenting on the psak of the Shulchan Aruch, which is based on the tour, which is based on the Rush, is Ayin the Kamon Simin Reish Mem Hey Sifyud Aleph, a later reference. He says Vedasa Tosas Parakama the Bab Mitzia Vavo Med Aleph Dibra Masel Vahaka Tosas and Bab Mitzia and Vavo Med Aleph. This is the case. Uba Hagos Mordechai, Vehagos Ashri, Veha Agudasham B'Shembri, meaning numerous other Makoros sources. Near Lahedja, it seems very clear that they hold Im Chazav V'Takfa Mimenu Zocha, that if the other fellow comes back and he overpowers him in round 2, or round 10 or whatever it is, that whoever, overpowers the other gets to keep it until you get a real evidence. I mean, against the Rush. Ayin Sham. V'cheinu Bagos Maimunios, so Perikadatoin Beniton, Behuva B'Tshuvas Mabit, B'Shelos Hashnios, Simin Lamed Aleph. He says, Uladati, says the Shach was a very confident man. He, whenever he came to a conclusion, he didn't shy away from expressing it. So he says, in my opinion, even though the Tur and the Shulchan Aruch and the Sma, they all paskin like the Rush, he said, my reading of the totality of the discussions is that Ishtamit LeBeis Yosef, the Beis Yosef wrote a commentary on the Tur. The Beis Yosef is a commentary on the Tur. Beis Yosef was written by Rabbi Yosef Karo, who wrote the Kesef Mishnah on the Rambam, the Beis Yosef on the Tur, and the Shulchan Aruch. He's the author of the Shulchan Aruch. So he says the Beis Yosef, when he says Ishtamet Beis Yosef and the Shulchan Aruch, meaning the author of the Beis Yosef ignored the other evidence, Kol Hanech Mechabrim, that I just brought. Sharei lo hiviam b'sifro Beis Yosef klal. He says in his math, the Beis Yosef is a very extensive perush on the Tur. And if you read the Beis Yosef, one of the things that's so impressive about it is the extent of his library, meaning his control of, so many different authorities there and their works. He just quotes, from all over. So the Shach says it's very surprising that the Beis Yosef, who typically, is so familiar with and deals with all the different sources, when it came to this, he practically only quotes the Rosh, and he ignores the majority view, which the Shach was quoting from before. So he says, for that reason, he says, I, the Shach, paskin against the Tur, against the Beis Yosef, against the Shulchan Aruch, and I think that there is more than one round. Hilka Chanira Ladina, he says, I think lahalacha, the Imchazer v'takfa, if Shimon, who lost round one, recovers and he wins round two, then ein motzi and miyado. Give the plukta derabusahi, because this is a big argument among the authorities. The Gamruba Ninu, and in my opinion, he said, the majority do disagree with the Rosh. That's very fascinating. Okay, let's look at Rosh number 2 for a moment.
By the way, are all rules of social behavior waived in this column? In other words, can the guy come and do chavala? Can he punch the guy?
No.
So where does the
I mean there are the Chaval is an Isser. No one is Mater Isurim here. That's but they're struggling over.
We are sort of. All right,
it's a tug of war,
Is the winner of the conflict, whether temporary or long-term or forever, is he responsible to maintain the object in question so that if he ever loses it to the opposing party, that it must be in good condition?
That's a great question. That's a little bit what I was referring to before. I hope we'll get to those sources. If we don't get them today, we'll get them next week. And that is I mentioned before that the Rajba accused. You know what? Let's look at it for 1 second. So let's look at this Gemara for a minute. Let's see. After the Shita Mekubetzes on page 2. You see, it says Bavli Bava Kama Kufyud Zayin Omid Aleph.
Page 2 of
page
the new,
of the new ones. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Page 2, and what is the line?
It says Bavli Bava Kama Kufyud Zayin Omid Aleph.
Yes. Okay.
So this is an interesting Gemara in the end of Bava Kama. Very interesting. It goes as follows: Hahu Shuta, some sort of object. To have a mansola betre, two people are quarreling over the ownership, just like we're talking about here. Two people arguing, each one claiming that the object belongs exclusively to him. Hayomer didihu. This Ruvain says the whole thing belongs to me. Shimon says the whole thing belongs to me. Sound familiar? Normally, how would you paskin? Kol dalam gavar. But what happened here was a tricky little business. Ozal chad minayu. Instead of going to court and then, setting up a round one or several rounds, what happened was they're arguing and Ruvain takes preemptive action. He gives it to the strong man of the government as a gift. Meaning the other fellow doesn't have the ability, to gain access to it after that. So he short-circuited what would have been round one of the Kol Dalam Gava. Isn't that interesting?
So he basically said, if I can't get it, you won't get it either.
Well, but he decided in a way he got it because he curried favor with the Farhang.
Giving the gift.
Yeah.
And
So
the
Amar
old-
Abaya, that was his choice. I mean, he disposed of it the way he wanted to, you know. So Amar Abaya, Yachal Lomar, Anoki Masri, Didi Masri. So Abaya said, no problem. We would have said Kol Alam Gavar. But in either way, he's claiming it's his. So, prove him wrong. He said, I did give it away, but I gave away my own object. The guy's saying you're a thief.
But if he proves him wrong, he has to compensate him.
Proving wrong, but we're talking about an absence of evidence here. Amalei Rava. So Rava says, Kol Kamine, meaning this was supposed to be, Miniach Meneim V'Kol Dalam Gavar. He short-circuited that. He's allowed to do that. Elamarava Mishamtinan Le, Ademaisi Le, V'Koi Bedina. This is very interesting. We impose like a cherem on him. We say to him, I don't care that you gave it to this Farhenga, and that, he's a strong man and it's hard to get it back from him. That's your problem. Get it back. We have to go through the process of Kol Alam Gavar. So in a way, this is a fascinating argument because if Kol Alam Gavar was a regular psak, then of course Rava would be right. But since the psak is, that we're not going to paskin, we're going to let you fight it out. So maybe Abai is right. Abai is saying, well, he, there are all sorts of ways of fighting. Sometimes you fight, by, you say 1, 2, 3, pull, and sometimes you fight a little bit, unorthodoxly, and you give it to somebody, you put it out of reach of the other fellow, right? So this is a very interesting question. It could be it's this question, Gufa. So, yeah. So what's going on here? What is the issue? So we'll get back to some of the other explanations later, but I just want to give the Rabbi and the Rajba because you both asked. So look on page 3. How does the Ravid interpret this? So Zelashona Ravid. Everybody see it on page 3? How shuta pirish machteshes gedola? Right, some sort of a big pot or something. Munachas al gabe karka. They have a mansela betray. 2 people are struggling over it. Komchad minayu masri lefarhen gedamalka. Rabbi yachal omer in masri v'tidi masri pirush. Hai shusa kivin lo tafsiba. Dina called elam gavar. Since neither one is holding on to it, the law would be that they would struggle over it. Kahu arva the bercheskas abatim. Rabbi kivin the dina dahai called elam gavar. Meimar amar heich ana gavar minach. The mashvina gavra alma b'charikai. So he says, so Abaya says this is a form of kol alam gavar. Instead of me, fighting with you over this, I picked my champion, my farhenga. He's my stand-in. Can kol alam gavar have a stand-in? Probably not according to the Rush, by the way, right? According to the Rush, the psychology is all about the individual effort, or at least half of the psychology is about the effort of the protagonists.
But maybe the effort is only the ultimate result, not the first round.
Well, but the Rush is the one who thinks that there's only one round. But anyways, yeah, okay. But Amarle Rava says, Kol Kamina Demashva Gavra Tute. You could appoint somebody, it called Alam Gavar means the 2 of you have to struggle. Hilkach Mishamtinale Adamaisile, the kind of
Gavar would not allow you to use a shliach?
What?
Kol Olam Gavar would not allow you to use a shliach?
Well, that's what Abaya seems to be saying it would, and Rava seems to be saying it wouldn't, here, according to the Ravid, right? The Daini Odina called Alam Gavar, Odina de Palgi below Shvua. Mikol Mokom, now he adds, Mikame de Lipsek Lav Dinahu, the Hakati lo Gavar. The Ravid says, listen, there has to be a process here. Right?
Well, if it's Kol Olam Gavar, maybe there isn't a process.
Well, so that's exactly the question, right? That's exactly what I'm trying to highlight. But then the Ravid, so that's the way Abaya and Rava are understood according to the Ravid. The question is, when you are up, when there's a ruling of Kol Alam Gavar, is it a ruling and you have to go through with it, or is the whole point that there's no ruling and therefore whatever happens happens? right? Then the Ravid adds the following: Bani Omer, he says, I have something else to add here. The Hai Dina Kol Galam Gavar, Lav Dina Chatucha Hiliolam, right? Meaning Kol Galam Gavar never has an end. Meaning he disagrees with the Rush. The E Olim Hashta V'Shakalo Hashta, because even if Ruvain wins round one, Ulabasar Zimna Olim Idach V'Shakale Lo Mafkina Mine. He says, in my opinion, this is against the Rush. The Ravid was before the Rush, but it does make a difference. He says, in my opinion, even if Ruvain wins round one, if Shimon makes a comeback and wins round two, that'll stand. Mishum Haki Shaper Dan Rava, the Laisula, the Lav Kokamina Lizvuna, Velolo Urta. So this is so interesting. The Ravid not only disagrees with the Rush and says there's more than one round, he says if there's more than one round, then anything that anybody does to preclude the possibility of another round is unfair. So that's his pshat in Rava. He says, if you give it to the strong man, then you're taking it out of the contest. The contest not only continues,
it has to stay within reach of both protagonists.
There has to be a potential for the contest to continue. Isn't that quite amazing? So now look at the Rajba. Look at the Rajba. Let's go to the middle of the Rajba for a moment. It says 4 lines down. Because of a Ravid, he quotes the Ravid. The Hod, the Kol Alam Gavar, Lav Dina Chatucha. So the Rajba says, the Divrei Temahem, referring to the Ravid's comment that what? That if it's out of access of either party, that is unfair. You can't put it out of access. It always has to be, accessible for another round of the contest. So the Rajba says, Divrei Temahem, that's shocking. Deim Kain, Im Haisa Para, also the Shachto Liachla. Let's say it was a cow. So for the person who called Alam Gavar, he doesn't have the right to shecht it and to eat it. So Talmud b'fneim kayemes, because he's putting it. Once he does that, there's no more contest.
But he still has financial liability.
He's not allowed to, to secret it away somewhere.
But he still has the financial liability.
If you bring witnesses, of course, against him. We're talking about the absence of witnesses.
But you can never, you can never have another round.
He's saying if the Ravid requires that there always be the potential for another round, then you shouldn't be able to shecht it, you shouldn't be able to sell it, you shouldn't be able to hide it, right? Vahid arva de becheskas habatimi olim b'chad minayu asar laskira eitzel acherim. Maybe you're not even allowed to rent it out. Let's say it's a boat. So he won. Ruvain won. Ruvain now he wants to rent out his boat for the weekend. Right? Yeah. But if he rents out the boat, the other, that puts it out of access of the contest. The Divrei Harav, Tzrichen li Talmud. But according to the, so that's an interesting argument.
Even in Ayin Tachat Ayin, Shein Tachat Shein, the Mefarshim interpret that as being monetary compensation. They don't actually mean. So it would seem here that fighting is absolutely permitted, but everywhere else, but in Shein Tachat Shein,
it's not fighting to knock out a lid. That's what Andy asked before. No, there's no heter kabbalah. You're not allowed to draw blood. You're not allowed to knock out his eye. Chalila. We're talking about, far left, a tug of war, That's what we're talking about. Okay. By the way, how does the Rambam deal with this whole problem? We're going to stop in a couple of minutes, but a few more minutes. So the Rambam also does not seem to treat this as a real psak. The Rambam treats this as a Bezdin withdraws, Bezdin disengages, but what emerges is a fact on the grounds motzi mechaber olav araya. And it sounds like it's a one round, because this isn't called tfisa lachaledes asapek, since this is the method that we're using to produce the tfisa. Look at the Rambam. This is Perak Tazvav Halacha Dalid, not the next piece, but the one after. Shnaim shayu orim al asadeh, two people are struggling over a field. Zeomer shali, vein la'echad mem raya. Neither one has evidence, but each one's claiming ownership. O shehevi kol echad mem edim shi shalo o shalavosa, or each one has equal evidence, so they cancel each other out. O shehevi kol echad b'shnei edim she'achlu shnei chazaka. Right, Vashnayim she'idu b'hem elu hashnayim atmam she'idu b'hen elu. So the Rambam says, Minichin beineim is the language he uses twice. We, remove the object from them. V'cholam iskaber, whoever overpowers the other one, yered ba, v'yiyah ha'acher motzi miyado v'alav araya. So this is very fascinating. The Rambam doesn't say, like the Rush, that whoever emerges, at least on an interim level, is the likely owner. What he says is, we have no evidence and we have no basis to, even on an interim level, to paskin the shiloh. So what do? We disengage, meaning Besdin. We allow them to struggle over this object. And whoever first emerges, right, with the object, he becomes, going forward, the de facto tofes or machzik, and the other fellow has to then abide by the rule of motzi mechaber, all of a raya, and therefore, unless he brings a raya, it stays with his fellow. Not because of the psak of kol dalam gavar, but because of the metzius, the reality, that we provided a mechanism to create a tfisa which solves the interim problem.
What happened to what we said earlier, that once something comes to Besdin, one can no longer go back to motzi mechaber olav araya?
Well, no, once it's in the hands of Besdin. That was in the case of,
we even said that if there's no suffix anymore, so long as we declared a suffix, we can no longer go back to motzi mechaber olav araya. So Rambam obviously doesn't agree with that.
Well, he doesn't agree with it in one case, in a case where, to begin with, there was a suffix, and therefore the psak is to create a de facto motzi mechaber olav araya. So that's the exception to that case. So going back to the Rush,
it's also in a way to preserve social rationality, like the Rush thing, in a way.
What?
In other words, it's really by doing this, forcing the square peg, so to speak, into the round hole. He's basically doing it because he doesn't want to have the Wild West. Like, he's pretty much doing it for the same reason as the Rush, but he's finding another halachic vehicle.
Right, exactly. Like, it's a way of ending all of this, but not through psychology, let's say, but through, through another halachic mechanism called tfisa and motzi mechaber olav araya. Even though normally we say tfisa lachaledes asapek is no good, but here we want to create a tfisa lachaledes asapek because it's a different kind of a suffix. Okay, what's the second Rush? I'll just go through 3 Rushes. So go back to page number 1. So this is the Rush in Bab Metzia in the beginning of our Masechta. Rush Masechet Bab Metzia Perek Aleph Siman Aleph. Yeah.
The bottom of the page.
Yeah. So skip the first 2 lines, 3 lines. Go to line number 3. The kivin the shnei boim lefanenu muksakim begufatalis. We're talking about our case. Shnei moksim betalis yakloku. Since both of them are holding on to the object, anu tzrichim lifsok lahudin chaluka. We're obligated to paskin that we divide the talis. In our case, The kol davar she'anu roin biyad adam kashvinan shushalo, because anything that's in the hands, tfisa, of one party, we presume to be his, even if the other fellow is making a claim to the contrary. Kidamrinan, we talked about this already. Case of Basra. Here's where it gets exciting. Hilkach, says the Rush, ef shalifso kan din kol de alam gavar. Now, I think I mentioned this some weeks ago. Like all of the Rishonim are discussing the problem. How come in our Mishnah it says Yachloku? Shnai Moksim B'Taluk Yachloku. And how come in Bava Basra they say called Alam Gava in the boat case? Right? But I mentioned that there are really three ways you could ask that question. You can ask the question in a neutral way. We have two different psukim. We want to know why there's a discrepancy. We're not favoring one side over the other. We just want to know why they're not the same. That's what I call the neutral posture of asking the question. We're not asking, that one is better than the other or preferable to the other. We're just asking why they're different. But there are two other ways you could ask the same question. You could ask, how come we don't say Achloku also in Bava Basra? If you ask it that way, you're implying that Achloku is a preferred solution. Or you can ask, why don't you say Kol Alam Gavar in Bab Metzia, implying that Kol Alam Gavar is a preferred solution, right? The way the Rosh asks the question is, the way Tosas asks the question is Maishna. What's the difference? Neutral. But the way that the Rosh asks the question is, how come we're not saying Kol Alam Gavar in Bab Metzia? It's bad enough that we say Kol Alam Gavar in Bava Basra. You want to say it also in Bab Metzia? But, as we've already seen, of all Rishonim, the Rosh is like the softest on Kol Alam Gavar. He's the one who came up with a psychological explanation that at least, gives us a little more comfort when we use it, right? So I don't think it's a coincidence. So that's how we ask the question. Hilkach ef shaliso kan Kol Alam Gavar. We'd like to say Kol Alam Gavar, but we can't. Why? The boat, Hayomer Didi, V'chein Zelmer Shalavosai, Zelmer Shalavosai, Dosam Shiny, Sheinachan Ben Muksuk Medavar, Shemam Iron Olav, Dein Bezin B'chiyavim Limchos. In the case of Kol Alam Gavar, no one's holding on, right? So you're not taking it away from anyone. So then you can say the preferred psak of Kol Alam Gavar, right? Limisha Balikach Davar Sheinu Yodim Shomihu, V'hu Omer Shalihu. Hilkach ein roy lifsok din chaluka, and we don't. What's wrong with saying yachloku? The answer is because yachloku.
We also have the question about whether it's possible they're both telling the truth, or whether it's impossible. That
In most cases, even if it's possible, but in most cases it's a compromise. In most cases, you're giving the the thief half of the object, and you're taking away from the owner half of his object. That's what the Rush says. Ein roy lifsok chaluka shema nafsid la'echad mehem shelo kedin. But in Kol Alam Gavar v'yosa roy lomar shekol mitzis shetegaber yoda bekoach oberai sheyizke v'somchin al zeh, the same language. We rely on the psychology. Shemisha dinimo korav lahavi rayos. Whoever's, really the owner is going to leave no stone unturned until he proves it. Moreover, he has more adrenaline and more motivation, and he's burning with rage. That this other guy is trying to steal his money, and he wants to hold on to his own property. And the other guy is saying, listen, I thought I could steal this easily, but it's turning out, to require much more of my attention. It's not worth it for me. And anyways, the guy may end up bringing witnesses since he is telling the truth and I'm the one who's lying. But so that's why Kol Alam Gavar has a certain charm, according to the Rush, even over Yachloku. The only thing is, you can't take it away from somebody who has rights in it, and then say Kol Alam Gavar. We're not going to allow you to steal the half from each person in order to say Kol Alam Gavar. So that's the second rush. The first rush was there's only one round, and the psychology is a basis for Kol Alam Gavar. The second rush is psychology is the basis for Kol Alam Gavar. Ad Kedei Kach, that all things being equal, we'd prefer to say Kol Alam Gavar in some cases than Yachlok. What about the third? So the third, turn to the next page. What this will conclude for today is a tshuva the rush. In this tshuva, the language is different, but the psychology is the same. So this is what they asked him. Mori She'eri, a Rav Shlomo Halevi. He had some relative named Rav Shlomo Halevi. I don't know who that is. Some relative of the Rush. So he says about him, Yafa Kasafta, he wrote him a letter, making a suggestion. We'll see what the suggestion is in a moment. And the Rush said, good idea. What's the good idea? Al hadin shenifsak kol da'alim gavar, v'gavar yod ha'echad v'tafas, shekenegdo yochol hashbio shebedin tafas. Let's say you have a kol da'alim gavar situation, and Ruvain is victorious over Shimon. So the cousin, or the relative, said to the Rosh, in my opinion, even though we say kol da'alim gavar and Ruvain keeps the object, Shimon at least has the right to say to Reuven, take a shvuah, take an oath in Bezdin that you're not lying and that this object is yours.
What kind of shvuah would this be? Doesn't fit any of the.
I mean, we have such shvuos, but it would probably be a shvuas.
Like an 8 achot shvuah. What is it? What is it like?
Oh, it's like a hesses, right? It would be nishma v'niftar. So, that's what he says. Well, let me continue for a minute. I've had to paskina and called. Why wouldn't you say this? He says had to paskina and called alam gavar. After all, says the Rush, the psak of called alam gavar lav dinahu. It's not a din. Do you remember that in Bab Metzia and above Basra he said dinahu?
Yeah.
All of a sudden he's saying lav dinahu, because he's trying to explain what does he mean? Bezdin paskuli called alam gavar v'gavar yadi v'zachitzi mikoach Bezdin the ainli lishava. What would he say? What would be the argument against the cousin's suggestion? He's saying, I don't need to swear to you. I've got evidence that it's mine. What's the evidence? Bezdin said called alam gavar. I went through the process, and turns out I overcame,
Actually, this Bezdin didn't say kol da'alam gavar. The ruling is this Bezdin said I'm out.
Exactly. So that's kind of what's going on here. They're also saying, well, what would be the argument that he can't say to the guy? That he can say to the guy, I refuse to swear. He'll say, I refuse to swear because this has already been settled.
You have no authority over me to make me swear.
Not only you have no authority over me, it's already been settled that I'm the real owner. Why is it settled? Because that's the psak. And I won. Says the Rosh, that's not true. The real reason is not that Bezdin says this is the birur. It's the Bezdin says we don't have a way to be mavarer. The ein shum echad mehem muksak. Amar Chazal called alam gavar v'samchu chachamim al zeh ki oso shamim lo yasim nafshe bekapo lilachim shelo yigzal acher b'mamono v'mishakar l'torach kulahai v'gam yarei shema yimatzei halom. The same Megillah, right? The three reasons. Again, v'samach. But in Bab Metzia and Baba Basra, when the Rosh writes it, he's writing it to show that Kol Da'alam Gavar is either a preferred solution over Yachloku, or to explain why we justify it at all. He's saying that there's a basis for it. Here it's the opposite. He's saying lav dinahu, and therefore it remains a suffix. So if you want to walk away and keep this object, you should have to at least take a shvua. After all, Bezin isn't signing on even interim basis that this is yours. They're saying this is an interim solution. You can keep it because we don't have a better way to solve it. If you don't have a better way to solve it, so the answer is violence or might, the answer is no. There's a smock. There's a psychological basis for being able to go to sleep at night and think that this may have turned out okay, but it's not convincing enough, right? That he can say, oh, Bezdin was mevarer. I don't have to give you a shvua. So that's what the continuation is. The kivin de lav dinahu. See, this is the second time he says lav dina. In Bava Metzia and above Kama, the Rosh wrote dinahu, right? Motzi in the Chlememer Stabali de Bedin Tafasta. Okay. Later on, he says, Hilkach nistalku chakamim minadin, v'amr kol da'alam gavar, ulai yisparer davar lachar zman shomihu, v'samchu k'tzas ala svar shekasavti le'el. So what happened here is, I don't know if he changed his mind, or he was always a little more reticent than it seemed like in Bava Metzia and in Bava Basra. But you can understand why. I mean, the forces at play here are very questionable, right? On the one hand, you can see the charm in letting this resolve itself without Bezin having to, tarnish its gold standards. You wouldn't do that if you felt that it was totally arbitrary and that there wasn't some psychological basis, for thinking, at least in an interim way, that the person who emerges from the struggle is the right person. But that's hardly a guarantee. It's not an objective birur. It's not a psak, and it's not a din in that sense. And therefore, the idea that, we still have our doubts and that this is an interim rather than a long-term solution, and therefore that you can demand a shvua makes a lot of sense. So it's interesting. I mentioned before, the Tur, quotes the Rosh. He quotes these three, the psychological explanation. He also quotes this idea about the shvua, even though this is from a tshuva. And the Shulchan Aruch paskins it. But in the Prisha, Prisha is a perish of the author of the Sma wrote the Drisha and the Prisha on the Tur. So he quotes this Chuvas Harash. So it's like this. The Beis Yosef quotes the Chuvas Harash, and he says, yeah, of course, it's obvious. And the Prisha quotes the Chuvas Harash, and he says, I'm not so sure whether I would agree with that. After all, he says, you could argue with it from 2 points of view. One thing you could say is, well, it's a psak of the Bezdin, and therefore there's no need for a shvua. The other thing you could say is, it's so not a psak, it's just an interim arrangement to make sure that everybody starts fighting. And therefore, since it's only interim, it's not long-term, so maybe you don't have to give a shvua either, because, it's not as if, we're endorsing, your ownership. We're just endorsing this is an interim solution. So maybe where do we find anywhere else that in an interim solution you have to, it can be, you can force somebody to take a shvua. Now, most of the poskim really do paskin like this rush, but it's an very interesting thing how two of the controversial psakim of the rush, one that there's only one round, and two that there is that you can force the other person to make a shvua. They really, became normative rules when it came to Kol Dalam Gavar. There's a third issue that's very interesting. And that is the following question. Let's say you have a suffix, who is the owner of an object, but let's say this suffix is rooted not in the claims and counterclaims, but in the a legal ambiguity, what we call a suffix dina. So if there's a suffix dina, like how to paskin, and depending on if you paskin one way it'll go to Ruvain. If you paskin another way, it'll go to Shimon, and we have a Safek Dina. Will you ever say Kol Alam Gavar or not? So this is a Trumas Hadesha, another Trumas Hadesha.
Isn't Kol Olam Gava only on a factual question?
That's what we're wondering. So the Trumas Hadesha, there's a whole Mordechai and Gittin, and there's a whole literature on this. The classic case, of course, is where it's a factual argument. So look at the other Shach for a moment. This is the last entry. Second to last entry, Shulchan Aruch Kol Shemishpat Kuf Lamed Tes.
Page 4.
Page 4. So the second last entry says, Hagad is a Ramah in Shulchan Aruch. Davar Shaposkim Cholkim Bo, a matter in which there's an argument among the poskim. V'lo tafsi chad minayu. Just 1 second. Urgent. V'lo tafsi chad minayu, and no one's holding on to the object. Imu davar d'shaych b'chaluka cholkim. If it's a kind of thing that you could divide, you would do that. The lo shaykh bechaluka called the alim gavar. Then you would say called alim gavar in a safek din, and it says tafeh. That's Trumas Hadeshen, simin shin nun base. So if you look at the Shach, he says,
but can't you almost always do cholku? You can always sell the item and divide the proceeds.
Well, usually you have to look at the Trumas Hadeshen. He has a case where there's no chaluka, whatever. I'm not going to read the whole Shach because I don't want to go so long, but the Shach here raises the question, and the Shach wrote an independent work, which he makes reference to here as well, called Tokva Kohen. There's a Gemara in the Gemara in Bab Metzion, Vav Amud Aleph to Vav Amud Beis, is this famous sugya of Tokva Kohen. It's connected to what we were talking about before a little bit, which is Tokva Echad Bifanenu, where one guy grabbed it in the state of Shnaim Oksim Gachloku, he overpowered the other guy. But anyways, the Tokva Kohen is like, a very famous topic. So the Shach wrote a book called Tokva Kohen, in which he discusses issues of tfisa. Like what happens if, this fellow grabs it from the other fellow in a state of safek, and so on and so forth. So in that sefer, and he makes allusion to it here in the Shach as well, he says, I don't understand. If you hold like the Rush, says the Shach, you could never say called Alam Gavar in a Safek Dina, because the other, neither Ruvain nor Shimon know whether they're right or not, right? Because it's their claims rest on a legal question, a legal dispute among the Chachamim, not on a factual claim of, this or that. If it's Zeomer Shalavosai, Zeomer Shalavosai, Zeomer Shali, Zeomer Shali, you could say, well, each, they both know who's telling the truth and who's lying. But if the disposition of the case depends on a machlokas between the Rambam and the Ravid, so again, if we have nothing to do and there's no evidence, and it's a question of siluk, of disengaging to protect the reputation of Bezin, that's true for a Safek Dina as well as for a Safek Taina. But if you think that the Rush is consideration that there is a psychological, partial, quasi, whatever you want to call it, birur, because, Ruvain knows he's telling the truth and Shimon knows it too, that's not true in a case of Safek Dina. Okay, so we'll stop here. Maybe next time we'll go on to a different topic, maybe how about the Behefker, or what we call V'lech Zizuzi Mimanakat, but we'll continue Mir Hashem next week. I'm going to send out to Sheila, if anybody's interested. Again, I give a yearly shir in memory of my mother, as my mother's Yortzeit, which is always on Hanukkah. But for logistical reasons, it's going to be in Yeshiva University next Monday night. If anybody's interested in coming or in listening to the Zoom, I think it'll be a Zoom option. So we'll send it out through Sheila if there's an interest.
What time is that Monday night? Do you know the time?
I'm not sure. I think it's 8
Okay.
o'clock, but
Yeah,
I'll
usually you do it at 8 o'clock. I was going to ask you if it's 8 o'clock.
yeah. The other years I did it at 8, right?
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, so it'll likely be at 8 as well. But as soon as I have the flyer, I'll send it to Sheila. And,
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Have a great evening. Thank you.
okay,
Uh,
and we'll continue in Mirza Hashem next week.
Thank you.